If you've ever wondered why your project is taking way longer than expected, it's probably for this one reason: the full stack developer myth. This myth often leads to unrealistic expectations, disappointment, and most of all, delayed launches and those blown budgets. In this video, I'll break down what full stack really means, why it's often misunderstood, and how it affects your startup and project. Don't worry, I'll also show you how to fix it. I spent 15 years in tech and share practical tips and strategies to help founders build products that people love. So let's dive right in. What is full stack? Or in this case, a full stack developer, because usually it refers to the person who's building in a full stack manner. This is one person who might be working on both your front end and your back end. Typically speaking, they're going to be well versed in multiple technologies in order to be able to effectively do this kind of front end and back end work. And if you're curious what a front end and a back end is, I've got a whole video about that over there. At the end of the day, it's a bit of a case of someone who's a jack of all trades and a master of none. Now that might be exactly what you're looking for, or it might cause you a bunch of problems down the line. So why should you care? Because on the surface, a full stack developer sounds frigging awesome. One person that you can go find, you can go get, and they can kind of build everything. Seems like job's done. Well, this is the misunderstanding, and I want to share with you 6 ways it can often go wrong and result in unexpected consequences. The first one is speed, or should I say, the lack of it. Typically speaking, when you get a full stack developer, especially if it's just one, they're doing both the front end and the back end, meaning that they can't do any work in parallel because it's one person. Usually, when you get multiple folks to work on this, front end and back end can be built in parallel. There are points of integration where maybe one needs to wait on the other for a little bit, but they're very, very minimal. And so overall, your project time is going to drag out quite a bit. The second way it affects speed has to do with experiences and skills, or rather the fact that they may not have the exact skill sets that you require. Usually I see this when you get a front-end developer who has got loads of experience creating websites or platforms on the web, and then you say, well, I need an app. And they're like, that's fine, I can work that out. It's not that tricky, is it? But the issue with this is that they haven't done it before. And when you haven't done something before, all the little snags are new to you. When you walk that road for the first time, there's all kinds of stuff that pops up and causes you to make mistakes, figure things out as you go, and everything drags out, again resulting in a longer project time. And as we all know, a longer project time also means that things start to creep over budget. The reason I call this mobile example out specifically is when it comes to mobile development, there are all kinds of snags that are key. For example, the App Store review process, the way that you deploy things, if you want to roll out betas to folks or use something like TestFlight if you're creating an iOS app. These are all things that your full stack developer may not have done before and needs to figure out as they go. This means endless time Googling when they could have just gone on with it. The third way it affects things is in terms of quality. Now, usually I say don't stress about this too much, especially if you're very early on in your startup. The whole idea is to get your product out there, to get validation, to get traction, and build your MVP in a kind of scrappy way. But sometimes that's simply not possible. If you're working on a medical app, or you're working with the government, you've got state funding, things need to roll out, or people's lives kind of depend on this, especially when we're thinking about medical apps, you really can't have things break as you're building the foundation and the structure of the entire building at the same time. So in that case, you really need folks with, again, specialized skill sets. Here, usually we start to see issues on the back-end side of things. Your engineer probably knows how to string together the front end and the back end. They can create a database, put some users in there, maybe some content, especially if you've got an LMS type of situation set up. And that's all pretty straightforward. Equally, it could be that you have really strict loading time requirements. And when a backend is kind of coded or created in an inefficient way, it can cause lots of loading time. If you are, for example, operating flights, you can't really have much delay or much lag on the dashboard if you're looking at a live setup, for example, of all the planes landing at an airport. So it really depends on what you're creating and whether or not you can afford to compromise quality. I will say for most products, this is not the most important factor. However, number 4 might be. And that's the single point of failure. This is especially the case if you only hire one person to do your front end and your back end, because what happens if anything happens to that person? All the knowledge is kind of gone down the drain. Secondly, it could also be that they have availability now, they've created your entire project, but then later on when you need updates or maintenance, it's very hard to pin that person down. This in turn means that you need to bring someone else in. And typically when something's fully been created by one person, there are lots of little shortcuts, hacks, tricks, and so on that they've put in that are very particular to that person and really hard to understand for another engineer coming in. It's a bit like you open up a wiring panel and you're not the one that did all the wiring, and you have a really hard time figuring out what's what, which cable is leading to where, and how you can start to go about fixing things. The benefit of having more than one person work on your product is the discussion. The fact that between you and maybe multiple engineers, the technical choices that are being made are continuously discussed. You don't want someone to just go ahead and only really do what they're comfortable with and picking technologies because that's just what they know and how they've always done things, which may not in turn be quite as useful to you. I talk a bit more about this in the front-end back-end video, but basically it can really impact who you can hire down the line if someone's choosing to write stuff in a particular technology. This person might be really affordable right now, but if you need to replace someone who can write only in that language or only in that framework, and there's only a few folks around, it can then suddenly drastically up the cost of your product. The fifth consideration is communication. Now, I've touched on this on a couple of the previous points, but I'm going to summarize it for you here. Typically speaking, full stack developers are really busy, meaning that they don't have a lot of time to communicate with you. They're just trying to get on with things because they have so much stuff to build and to do. When there's less communication, there is more inadvertently miscommunication, meaning that the stuff that they are chipping away at with such vigor could be the complete wrong thing to build because there haven't been enough check-ins. Now, the more check-ins you add, the more delay there might be, and so it's a bit of a what do you do in that situation? And this also ties to what I just said, with more people forces more communication, which at least means that typically speaking, folks stay on the same page better, and you are continuously going towards your direction of building this product, and you have more chances to course correct as you go along. The sixth and final point has to do with hiring. It's really hard to find a good full stack developer. And the mistake I often see founders make here is they put up the job ad for a full stack engineer and they sit back and wait. And because it's so hard to find the right person, they keep waiting, when instead, if they could have gotten a good combination of people, they could have started their product months before they would have found that final great, good full stack engineer they've been waiting on for so long. Now, how do you address this problem practically? What are a couple things that you can do to tackle this head on? Well, I've got 5 tips for you. Number 1, be clear on your requirements. And if you are not, work together either during the interview processes or with a couple of people in your network that you do know about which technologies you actually need. Make sure that the people you're getting actually have experience with those technologies and that the technologies aren't being kind of forced upon you just because it's what they're comfortable with. Start with the product first and then work your way backwards. The second tip is to start versatile and then specialize as you go. So you can start with a full stack engineer and get the ball rolling, but you might want to bring on specialists down the line who might want a contract for a day a week here or something like that. Make sure that you communicate this plan with your full stack engineer, because I'll be very honest, sometimes it can lead to a little bit of ego drama, but most of the time when it's expected, it's absolutely fine. Engineers are super collaborative and they love problem solving together. And so bringing in specialist aid where it's needed, for example, when you're nearing the end of an app project and you're starting to get ready to deploy it to the store, you might want to bring someone who's specialized in either iOS or Android to help with some final fixes and snags. The third tip is when you're talking to an agency, make sure you know who's actually working on your product. Who does the team comprise of? What are the skill sets? The exact same as before, it could be a team all of full stack engineers with general skills, or it could be a bunch of various specialists, which is the ideal case. So chat to your agency and get to know who's actually working on your product. The fourth tip is don't skimp on values and communication skills. Very often as a founder, especially a non-technical founder, you feel like you need to just grab the first person that you come across who can finally build the thing for you. And you trust their skill set because you might be thinking, well, who am I to say that someone should be using this or that? I'm not the technical one, that's why I'm hiring you. But there are so many engineers out there. Going with someone who understands your values, understands the mission of your business, can really ease up the development process. If they have some understanding of how people would use the product or the industry that you might be in, they might be able to suggest useful things during the development process, and it can feel more like you're working together as a team, rather than you handing off a task, hoping and praying for the best, and it kind of being, thrown back at you over the fence and you going, oh, I guess this is all right, or oh, it's not quite what I was expecting. And it's the same for communication skills. Communication skills are so key, especially early on in the project, because so many of the decisions they're making really influence your business down the line. And equally, you're learning things from your clients or the interviews you're doing or the kind of business work that you're doing. And you want to make sure that's being taken into account when it comes to building the product. This back and forth communication is so key and so helpful in ensuring the best possible product outcome. The fifth and final tip, and just the last thing I'll say about this, is if it feels wrong, don't do it. The amount of times I've seen founders make that mistake and admit to me saying, you know what, I had an icky feeling about this at the start. I went ahead with it because I felt like I really needed the person, and it's just completely blown up stuff. It now means I have tons of shit to clean up. Whether that is super delayed and over budget, whether that's I now need to go back to my clients, my pilot people, and explain everything, or the fact that I need to redo an entire project and hire and kind of spend all that money all over again. There's been so many examples of this going wrong. And so if it doesn't feel right, just don't do it. So when might full stack actually be the right decision for you? Well, firstly, if you've got a fairly straightforward app, meaning there's not tons of detailed interactions on the front end, maybe no complicated graphs, or it needs to use really niche things on like a video on the phone or things like that. And equally, no massive backend restrictions. If you've got a simple backend, maybe it connects to a couple other services, it runs a couple processes on things, and that's it. It's pretty straightforward. You're probably going to be just fine. The other time is when it's their specialty. They've really been there, done the work, done this for years, and they're very clear in how they can explain to you all the choices they're making and why they're doing that and why it's relevant and useful specifically to your project. What I will say as well is talk to previous clients. That's the best way to get an idea on whether this person is the right fit for you. What was their communication style like? Did it deliver on time? Did it deliver on budget? If not, what was the reason? How, was the other person involved in that decision making, and how did all of that go? Speaking to past clients is one of the best ways to evaluate hiring candidates. And the last one is when they have a really clear plan for your requirements. Again, it's a signal of clear communication. It's a signal of experience. It's basically a summary of everything we've spoken about so far. If they can sit you down and make a super clear plan with you, that is a really good indicator. So you might want to go with full stack after all. Either way, good luck. Let me know how it goes. If you've got any times where things have gone wrong for you or really right for you, pop them in the comments down below. I'd love to read them.